Chuck E. Cheese's, a popular family destination known for its arcade games, pizza, and lovable mascot characters. Speaking of the mascots, they can be found on artwork inside the locations, animatronics singing up on the stage, physical costume characters, board games, many video games, tons of other merchandise, and even in the company's logo. But something the mascots also appear on pretty often is the company's rides and games. And of course, the ride we'll be talking about today is none other than the Chuck E. Cheese's Photo Ride. This iconic kids attraction is known by generations and actually has some pretty interesting history that I want to talk about. So without further ado, this is the history of the Chuck E. Cheese's Photo Ride.
Boring restaurants versus Chuck E. Cheese's. You can wait for the waitress or play cool games. Wait for their food or eat out pizza. You can wait
and wait and wait.
Show us a Chuck E. Cheese, please.
Yeah, remember Chuck E. Cheese, please. It's the restaurant where a kid can be a kid.
Before we go over the history of that iconic kiddie ride, let's first go over the history of Chuck E. Cheese's as a whole up to this point in time. The first Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater opened on May 17, 1977 in San Jose, California. It was founded by Nolan Bushnell, who was also a co-founder of the video game company Atari. He wanted a safe place for families to go to enjoy Atari's latest arcade games, and with this, he combined the concept of a restaurant and animatronic entertainment. After the video game crash of 1983, Pizza Time Theater filed for bankruptcy in 1984, and their competitor Showbiz Pizza Place bought them, and the companies merged in 1986. Although the brands themselves remained separate. But that all changed in the early 1990s, when all Showbiz Pizza Place locations were rebranded as Chuck E. Cheese's. And by the mid-1990s, Chuck E. Cheese was trying to find a way to stay relevant to the kids of the 90s, which included adding cooler games and rides. And that's the time period we're at this point in Chuck E. Cheese's history, so let's move on. Sometime in 1994, Chuck E. Cheese's Photo Ride officially made its debut at Chuck E. Cheese's locations. The ride was created by Amutech, a well-known kiddie ride manufacturer that produced many famous kiddie rides. They produced many other kiddie rides for Chuck E. Cheese, such as the Chuck E. Cheese Kiddie Coaster and the Chuck E. Cheese's Trolley Car. Also, before we talk about the Chuck E. version, I just want to say that Amutech made a generic version of the photo ride that any business could use because it didn't use the Chuck E. Cheese characters or audio. The original version of the ride for some reason featured Chucky in his Pizza Time Theater outfit, featuring his vest and derby hat. This is strange because this design of Chucky had been retired a few years earlier, but I may know why this could have happened. You see, even into the early 1990s, the Pizza Time Theater version of Chucky was still being used on a lot of things, including a lot of merchandise. Maybe when they were designing the ride, the Pizza Time Theater version of Chucky was still his current look, and when they released it, they didn't want to waste money on changing the statues already put on the ride, so they kept the old design. Who knows? However, on the original version of the ride, it featured Chucky in his tuxedo outfit, and the photo ride logo, along with it saying, "The kiddie ride that takes your picture." Anyways, Chucky is sitting in a red car with yellow wheels, and as the ride goes on, the car moves up and down, and the lights flash on the car as well. Inside the car was a set of buttons, and when you pressed the button for a certain character, their lines would read out during the ride. The backside of the car had the classic Chuck E. Cheese's pizza logo. And of course, there's the main gimmick of the ride, the camera that takes your picture. The pictures that came from this ride were actually really good quality, and they were split with a blade in the machine to cut each individual picture, and they were taken similar to the way a Polaroid takes photos. Now, of course, when the ride was happening, there was a special audio that played during the ride, and thankfully, we have this entire audio archived, so I'm going to play it now.
Smile, you're about to have your picture taken. Don't forget to fill up with gas. Can I stick my head out the window? Hi, I'm Chuck E. Cheese. Let's go for a ride.
I'm Helen Henny. You're an excellent driver.
Hey, I'm Mr. Munch. Let's go get a pizza.
Your picture is now ready.
After hearing these audio recordings, it left me curious and made me really want to find out who the voice actors were in this audio. There's many options for who these actors and actresses could be, but I think I figured it out. The person voicing Chuck E. Cheese on this version of the photo ride is none other than Duncan Brannon, longtime Chuck E. Cheese voice actor from 1993 to 2012 that many fans love. Duncan was easy to figure out because of how recognizable his Chucky voice is, but the other characters weren't as easy. After listening to many Helen voice actresses from around this time, I came to the conclusion that in the original version of the photo ride, Helen was voiced by Carissa McKinney, Helen's voice actress from 1991 to 1994, and then again from 1996 to 2000. As for Mr. Munch, he was another difficult one to figure out, but I came to the conclusion that he was voiced by Doug Teal, Mr. Munch's voice actor from 1994 to 1996. And last but not least, you may be wondering, who voiced Jasper and Pasquale? Well, it actually wasn't two different people, it was one person, and that person was Bob West. He voiced both characters during various points in time, often leaving and returning to the CEC voice actor/actress cast. But he was definitely around at the time of the photo ride's creation. As for the first location that received the Chuck E. Cheese photo ride, I believe it was the Irving, Texas location, as they are known to do multiple tests during the company's lifespan. In an intermission from the September 2000 show, you can actually see Chuck E. Cheese voice actor Duncan Brannon riding the original 1994 version of the Chuck E. Cheese photo ride. As 1995 approached, some changes were made to the photo ride, but nothing major, it was still this version. They just added new signs featuring the new Cool Chuck logo. And on the back of the ride, the Chuck E. Cheese's pizza logo was removed and replaced with a decal that said, "Say Cheese with Chucky," featuring the new logo, along with a sticker that said Chuck E. Cheese or Bust. As for variants of this ride, I've seen some that had the Cool Chuck hat, and even some with a blue version of the Cool Chuck hat, and even one that didn't have the Chucky statue at all, and instead had another seat for another child. An original Chuck E. Cheese photo ride still existed at the Virginia Beach, Virginia Chuck E. Cheese's location by 2022. However, they have since received the 2.0 remodel, and I'm not sure if the ride is still there or not. Someone let me know in the comments. While this ride isn't featured in much Chuck E. Cheese's media, you can actually spot it in the background of some of the animatronic show tapes. Even though the original 1994 Chuck E. Cheese photo ride is now extinct, only a handful were ever made in the first place, because in 1995, a new version would emerge, the classic version, the one the majority of us probably remember. Let's get into it.
Boring restaurants versus Chuck E. Cheese's. Their food. Chuck E.'s food. Their host. Our host. Their games. Chuck E.'s games. Their prizes. Chuck E.'s prizes. Why go to a boring restaurant when you can go to Chuck E.'s? Next time Mom says, let's eat out. Remember, Chuck E. Cheese, please. The restaurant where a kid can be a kid.
It's safe to say in the mid-90s, Chuck E. Cheese was going through some changes. They were in the middle of an effort to redesign their restaurants to appeal more to the kids of the 90s, and this would have an effect on their kiddie rides as well. So the photo ride we all know and love was born, the Coach Chuck Photo Ride. This version of the photo ride was almost at every location, and it's the one I remember seeing the most. Look, I even still have my photos from this version of the photo ride from when I was younger. The 1995 photo ride doesn't have that many changes from the 1994 version. The only major change is the actual Chucky statue, which obviously has been updated to his newer design from at the time. On this version of the ride, Chucky can be seen wearing a red and green hat with a yellow star on it, a yellow sweater with green stripes and a green circle on the front. And it's hard to find a good picture of this, but I believe the back of the sweater had a star on it. The 1995 version of the ride still moves up and down and lights up like the 1994 version and plays the same audio tapes. But like I said earlier, this is the most well-known version of the ride, as pretty much almost every location featured it, and everyone remembers it fondly. While the variant of the 1995 Chuck E. Cheese photo ride that I just discussed is the most common and well-known version, there are many other variants that I need to go over. First, some stores had a version that didn't have the star on Chucky's hat. Some stores also featured a yellow hat instead of the normal red hat. Here's a version that doesn't have any green on Chucky's sweater. I even found some versions of the yellow sweater Coach Chuck ride that had a blue hat, which will relate to something I'm about to discuss. Next, we have the red Chucky version of the 1995 photo ride, which wasn't near as common as the yellow version, but a good handful of stores had it. If you couldn't tell, this variant of the ride is based on the red version of Coach Chucky, as opposed to the yellow version featured on the more common version of the ride and featured on the company's logo. This variant of the ride had Chucky with a blue hat that said CEC on it in red letters, along with a red and yellow sweater, which again said CEC on it in red letters, although some versions lacked the CEC letters written on the hat and sweater. Next, here's an obscure version I could only find one photo of, but it features the same blue and red hat as the previous photo ride, but instead, Chucky has a blue and red sweater to match, with a yellow C on it. I also found this blue sweater version, but it actually features the red hat from earlier, and on the sweater it just has a white circle. But what if I told you there was one more version of this ride, repainted to look like our beloved Avenger Chucky? And here it is. I really like this photo ride, although it's sort of weird seeing Avenger Chucky on the Coach Chuck photo ride, but I guess that doesn't really matter. It features Chucky in his iconic purple and green cap with the yellow C painted on it. And they definitely tried to make his outfit look like Avenger Chuck's, but it is just repainted Coach Chucky sweater, so it's just a purple and green sweater with the yellow C and green circle in the middle. And while it may seem like this was a job done by a specific CEC location, multiple locations actually had this photo ride, leading me to believe that this ride was actually produced like this. There's also this even more obscure Avenger Chuck photo ride, repainted from the Coach Chuck version, except it has a very different looking C, and the hat is the blue hat from all the other previous photo rides. As for other variants, some Chuckies had very small eyes. Some Chuckies also had eyes that were very thin and looked more like ovals. And this Chucky is even cross-eyed. Man, they needed to get some more quality control on some of the photo rides. Some Chuckies also were painted a very dark pink color on his ears and snout, while other Chucky's snouts and ears were painted a very pale tan color, almost white. The 1995 photo ride was also featured in many various pieces of Chuck E. Cheese's media. This includes various Chuck E. Cheese animatronic show tapes, Chuck E. Cheese television commercials, and those tabletop advertisement holders that Chuck E. Cheese used to have back in the 90s and 2000s. I even own one of these table advertisements in my Chuck E. Cheese collection, and I have to say it's a really neat piece of Chuck E. Cheese history, considering most of these were just thrown away over the years. I'm lucky one survived. As the 2000s and early 2010s came around, this was still the standard Chuck E. Cheese photo ride being installed in locations. However, this was going to change very soon.
Yum, 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 fun, fun, fun.
It's Chuck E. Cheese's newest Yum and Fun deal. A delicious one-topping large pizza.
That's the yum.
Plus 75 tokens.
That's the fun.
For $25. No one else offers your family that.
Yum, 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 fun, fun, fun.
Go to chuckecheese.com and get your coupon for our new one large pizza, 75 tokens, $25 Yum and Fun deal.
Where a kid can be a kid.
Only at Chuck E. Cheese's.
In 2012, Chuck E. Cheese decided to retire their classic photo ride and design a new one. And this wasn't just going to be a rehash of the original ride, it was going to be a completely new ride. In 2012, Chuck E. Cheese revealed their new version of the photo ride. The kiddie ride manufacturer Eunice is responsible for producing this version of the Chuck E. Cheese photo ride. You may know them because they also produced that sorta creepy Chuck E. Cheese train kiddie ride. The blue base on this ride looks pretty similar to the blue base on the original Chuck E.'s photo ride, except this one has checker patterns all over it. It features the new Avenger Chuck E. logo that was being used at the time. And above the Chuck E. Cheese logo, it of course says Photo Ride on the new sign for the ride. There's also these CEC 79 logos all over the car. I'm not sure what this means, but they're there. There's also a new camera that says Take 5 with Chucky and has yellow details. The new ride uses a red and yellow car like the previous rides, except it has a more modern design now. And not only do the lights light up, but the wheels do too. But before I move on, I gotta explain what this is. So pretty much before the Avenger photo ride was finalized, it featured a prototype version of the Avenger Chuck statue. And oh my gosh, it's bad. Chucky has this weird sweater shirt thing on that looks nothing like his Avenger outfit except for the colors. And if you look near his stomach, he's holding something. Pretty sure it's a ball, but a lot of people think this makes Chucky look pregnant, since the ball is the same color as his sweater shirt thing, but this just wasn't the best design choice. And the prototype version of the ride is the version you can see on the Chuck E. Cheese photo ride manual, and you can see he's wearing a hat, so the thing he's holding in his lap isn't his hat, so don't comment that. Luckily, this design flaw was quickly fixed, and they eventually gave Chucky his iconic purple, yellow, and green shirt, along with his backwards hat. They added a new logo featuring Chucky, Helen, Jasper, and Munch on the back and front of the car. The car now has new buttons featuring the Avenger versions of the Chuck E. Cheese characters. While I couldn't find an HD version of the Avenger photo ride audio online, I did record the Avenger audio at the Paducah, Kentucky location since their ride still uses that audio, so I'm going to play that for you guys now.
Get ready, one's about to start. Fasten your seatbelt and please stay seated. Smile and say Chuck E. Cheese. Can I stick my head out the window? And don't forget to fill up the gas. I'm Mr. Muggs. Let's go get a pizza. I'm Helen Henny. You are an excellent driver. Can I stick my head out the window? And don't forget to fill up the gas. I'm Mr. Muggs. Let's go get a pizza. Wow! was fun! Your picture is now ready.
It wasn't hard at all to figure out who voiced the characters on this ride. Duncan Brandon of course reprised his role as Chuck E. Cheese. Anna Gray LaBasse voiced Helen Henny. Rob Gotcher voiced Jasper T. Jowls. John Bowen voiced Mr. Munch. And Earl Fisher voiced Pasquale the Chef. With the new photo ride, it produced different pictures compared to the previous photo rides. Instead of being good quality photos, these were just printed on regular printer paper, and they weren't the best of quality. The borders on the photos are really nice though, but some locations had a blue border instead of purple. I'm guessing this change was just due to them using a new camera, but I'm not sure. As time went on, the Avenger photo ride would start seeing some changes. As we all know, in 2012, Chuck E. Cheese replaced Avenger Chucky, their longtime mascot, with Rockstar Chucky. This meant the photo ride was going to go through some minor changes. For example, some Avenger photo rides started showing Rockstar branding, which was literally just Avenger Chucky with Rockstar Chucky's head copied and pasted onto it. It looks awful. I don't know whose idea this is, but it just looks very cheap and bad. Some Avenger photo rides even got the Rockstar version of the audio, which I'll go over in the next chapter. This now meant there were tons of variants for the Avenger Chuck E. Cheese photo ride, with some having Avenger branding but the Rockstar audio, and some having Rockstar branding but having the Avenger audio, and some having Rockstar audio and branding, and some having Avenger branding and audio. It's just a big mess. Some other variants include Chucky with yellow painted on his hat instead of green, and some rides lacking the branding on the front of the car. The last major thing to happen with the Avenger Chucky photo rides was in 2019, long after they had been retired, but for some reason they started showing up at newly remodeled Chuck E. Cheese locations. I'm not sure what the reason was for this, but yeah, that happened. But changes were approaching quickly as Rockstar Chucky was taking over.
Follow me to fun. Follow me to fun. Everyone's invited. Just thinking about it gets me all excited. Pick your partner, pick your game. Every token plays one game. Making friends, acting silly, flat out going Chuck E. Cheesy. Follow me to fun. Follow me to fun. Follow me to fun. Chuck E. Cheese's, where a kid can't be a kid.
As we all know, in 2012, Rockstar Chucky became the new mascot of Chuck E. Cheese. This meant some changes were going to happen, and these changes include the Chuck E. Cheese photo ride. The ride essentially stayed the same, with the same car and base being used. However, the statue on the ride was changed to be like Rockstar Chucky, and a new audio was made for the ride.
Thanks for riding with me.
On this version of the ride, Chuck E. Cheese was voiced by Jarrett Reddick. Helen Henny was voiced by Caroline Taylor. Jasper T. Jowls was voiced by Jeremy Blado. Mr. Munch was voiced by Chris Hill. And Pasquale the Chef was voiced by Earl Fisher. Once again. Like I said earlier, the ride's physical form was mostly the same, reusing that cheap Rockstar branding. Around 2016, the majority of Chuck E. Cheese locations stopped using tokens, so most of the photo rides stopped using tokens as well, and you had to use a play pass to ride the ride. In 2019, Chuck E. Cheese updated the camera system on their rides and made it very nice quality. Well, it isn't the best, but it's way better than what they had before on the paper versions. And there are also many cool decorative borders on the photos. Around 2020 or 2021, a new statue was made for the photo ride. The photo ride itself didn't change, just the statue, and I think it looks a lot better. But most stores chose to keep the original Rockstar statue instead of getting the new one, which is what most stores have today.
Chuck E. Cheese Summer of Fun is a summer of yes! Yes to games. Yes to surprises. Yes to Chuck E. selfies. Yes! Summer of Fun, now playing at Chuck E. Cheese.
And yeah, here we are today. Most locations that Chuck E. Cheese has still feature the photo ride, albeit the newer Rockstar version, but I'd say it's still worth a try. It's a pretty cool need of Chuck E. Cheese history that's lasted a long time. However, I believe the Jackson, Mississippi location still has the 1995 version of the photo ride, so if you want to have a nostalgic experience, I recommend going to check it out. The Chuck E. Cheese in San Jose, California has their original 1995 photo ride on display in a window. I think that's really cool, and it's funny they have a Helen plush sitting in it. I even found this one guy in Iowa who owns the 1995 Chuck E. Cheese photo ride. If you want to own a piece of Chuck E. Cheese photo ride history yourself, occasionally parts from the ride appear on eBay, sometimes even the Chuck E. statues. Some museums and other businesses have also gotten their hands on the 1995 photo ride. They probably can't actually run it because the audio is copyrighted, but it's still a pretty neat piece of history. Hope you all enjoyed this video. I had a great time researching this topic. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment, and share, and until next time, bye for now.
Travel on. There's one day here and the next day gone. Sometimes you bend, sometimes you stand, sometimes you turn your back to the wind. There's a world outside every darkened door where blues won't haunt you anymore, where the brave are free and the lovers soar. Come ride with me to the distant shore. We won't hesitate to break down the garden gate. There's not much time left today.